it's recognising that we have a particular role as an ICB in reducing unwarranted variation and making sure that our services are fair and just across the whole of West Yorkshire. And to do that, coming in both as a lay person and as an academic partner, one of the things that always strikes me at this level is it can become incredibly impersonal, that we can get to numbers and we sort of lose the people behind it. And I know there are always concerns that this is about replacing the really great work that happens locally, but it's not. It's to always remember about how do we keep the end point in mind, that the way our conversations can be constructed can end up being about numbers, about percentages, and not about stories. And when we're looking at data, it's both of those things that really make a difference when we're trying to develop our approach together. And you'll have seen that this morning with our conversation with children and young people. And I hope you'll recognise that in the paper, actually, when we're talking about the focus on parts of our agenda, we did suggest that for children and young people we do it in a school, in a time where we meet them, and that we discuss those focus on agendas with our community present to be demonstrably accountable for our core aims. So we hope that it will bring the public into our meetings, that we think about them, but we will see our community around us as we make those really important strategic decisions. And no matter what you read in the papers, the stories that you heard this morning demonstrate the patterns that we know about children and young people in Yorkshire. So they enhance our ability to connect to those really important conversations. So the first piece is the focus on, we absolutely want to do that with our community around us. The second piece is the performance reports. When you look at the performance reports, they can feel cold to the public. They can feel distant. They can feel about stuff that feels a long way away from you. And by bringing for each of our performance reports, every time we meet, one aspect of that, we bring some lived stories in, not only about their experience, people's experience now, and the full range of those experiences, but also what that might mean for the future, because otherwise we're going to be really reactive. So it's not just about people's experience now, what it's like to sit outside a hospital waiting for an ambulance, what it's like to wait for a service for cancer, but also what will happen to me, what happens next. So we want to bring that future focus into those conversations too. Another aspect of this was for us as a board to remember how much of healthcare happens in people's homes. 80-90% of people's health happens in their homes. So let's start with where people are, the service that people look after and provide themselves. We heard from Tom this morning being a fabulous carer for his mum. How do we support people to look after themselves as best? What's really on top of people's minds at the moment, whether it's access to general practice, whether it's waiting, whether it's their concerns for their safety and communities, to always have that within every single report that we have. So it's a range of offers, rather than having a lived experience for us at the beginning, it's trying to really weave it through our decision-making process. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Hannah, would you just explain your role on the board? For anyone of you around the table, as well as anyone watching this meeting, our partnership, our integrated care partnership meeting on the 6th of September, and HealthWatch presented a report there where we were looking at key issues that are coming through for local people at the moment, which is incredibly helpful and is informing our strategy. Does anyone have any comments or questions at all? We're being asked here to support 4 ways of working as a group to embed systems decision-making. Magic and Ian, would you introduce yourself first?
I will do. I'm not sure if this mic is working or not, but I'm Majid, and I'm one of the independent members like Becky. So just a few things from us. I think it's really, really encouraging that one of the first things that we're doing around this board is anchoring our commitment to the patient voice and patient involvement. So really, really sort of feedback colleagues have took the bull by the horns, the bull by the horns and sort of brought this to the table here. Just a couple of things, and reflecting back on what some of the young people said to us, that often they are engaged and they do speak about their experience, etc. But what happens sometimes is that the follow-up action isn't always sort of implemented. So I know we've had some of these conversations before around accountability. So it'd be really, really good for us to pick out the themes as we sort of having these meetings and as we're engaging with communities, and then hold ourselves to account in 6, 12 months and say, well, what difference have we actually made? The so what question, I think that's really, really important. And also, many of our communities, they engage with other people like housing providers, the police, community and voluntary sector organisations, is to try and triangulate what's happening on the ground, what are people saying to other people, so that we do, as Becky said, is do our absolute best to reduce inequalities and those variations that we have. But overall, really welcome the paper and really support it, and really welcome the sort of positive outcomes that are going to arise as a result of this.
Thank you. Recently about holding ourselves to account, isn't there? And for people watching this meeting, we met with a group of children and young people this morning to have a discussion very openly about what's working, what's not. And they were incredibly honest with us, but particularly about services that are not quite connected together and giving us feedback. And we've committed as a board to go back and meet with them and discuss the plans that we're going to have discussed in our focus on session, as well as recommendations from as well. Ian, did you want to come
Yes.
Could you introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Cathy. Hi, everyone. I'm Ian Holmes. I'm Director of Strategy and Partnerships for the Integrated Care Board. So we've got an active race equality network that meets before these meetings and receives the papers and provides comments. Unfortunately, Fatima Khan Shah, who would be representing that group today, is unwell, so she's asked me just to feed back a couple of comments on the paper. That's okay. The first one, as you might expect, is around being really careful to assure that we're representative of the communities that we serve. So a bit of thought about how we reach communities that we don't hear from as much is really important, and an offer from the Race Equality Network. They'd like to work with you to help with that, and also to provide a sort of a voice into those conversations as well. And then the third point's similar to the one that Majid made, which is I think some people are suffering with consultation fatigue, and it's actually the closing the loops on the actions. We understand quite well what people's experience is for a lot of services, but it's making sure that we're delivering in response to that. So thanks very much.
Thank you. So these are principles for us to take on board. I don't think anyone else around the table wants to comment at all.
Hello everybody, my name's Rob, I'm the Chief Executive of the Integrated Care Board. A couple of things really. I think the first is, if you look around the table, you can tell this isn't like a board you've been on before. There's a lot of people sitting around the table representing different sectors. It's not like a traditional NHS board with a majority non-exec membership. There's a partnership here of people working together to improve outcomes, tackle that unwanted variation that Becky talked about, and deliver the biggest change that we can for the resources that we've got. As Cathy said, we've been doing this for about 6 years, and early on, Professor Don Berwick from the Institute for Care Improvement told us that he thought we should always have the person in the room with us when we're making the decisions and choices, and that's something we're trying to stick to. So because we're different, I think there's an opportunity with this sort of paper and this sort of approach to really signify that difference and demonstrate it in every meeting that we have. And for those of us who have been around for a while, it feels like we're already on that journey and have been doing much of that work, as Hannah referenced in the paper. But there's more that we can do now we're established people. So for me, the first thing is that I really genuinely welcome this. I think it's a way that we can demonstrate difference and make a bigger difference. I think the second thing is that the holding ourselves to account piece is going to be incredibly important. And Hannah and her colleagues in the past have always said, you have to tell us if you think that we're straying off the point. But we've got more than one conscience of the board around the table. I think for everybody to own that. Some people come in from that's their perspective and that's their job. Becky with her citizens and future generations role, Harris with his role. and so on. But all of us should feel confident that we can challenge each other when we triangulate the information that we've got. So I think what we're hearing here is we've already got the involvement framework, which is really positive. We've had the independent audit of that, which demonstrated the really strong work on things we needed to improve on. We've got the compendium of evidence that people have given us from our places to draw on, and then this adds further richness, more stories, and better, hopefully, decision making. So I guess that would be my 2 points, Kathy. We all have to own this, and we need to see this as part of an important triangulation of all of the evidence that we get.
Thank you very much. And this isn't about lots of things going on in different directions, is it? It's about bringing it together, aligned to that framework. We're welcoming Councillor Hinchcliffe from Bradford Council who's just arrived, who is deputising for Councillor Tim Swift for our Integrated Care Partnership. Are there any final comments at all? Kim, you want to set Harris from your perspective and useful, and Matt, would you introduce yourself?
Thank you, Chair. I'm Melanie Brown. I'm Director of System Reform and Integration. So you've got there. It's around the proposal 4 around the Health Watch reports and intelligence. I just think it's really important that we do gather that information from our Health Watch colleagues, from members of the public. But then how will we ensure that we hold ourselves to account as a board to ensure that we follow up and take ownership of the actions and recommendations that are highlighted? And I say that because sometimes those recommendations isn't really owned by colleagues around us, so as to think through how we can do that creatively.
So Matt, just to note that the actions out of the session, the formal session we had today with the children and people was to bring some board members together to meet with them again. And I think then we can bring it through, especially through the Transformation Committee, and report back up to you as well. And we also have a discussion about that we will know what else on later on and focus on as well. Right, we've got a one myself. Kim,
Right. Hi, I'm Kim Shuttler. I'm here for the Voluntary and Community Social Enterprise sector, and also the Senior Responsible Officer for Harnessing the Power of Communities, which is broadly the programme that works with the voluntary and community sector. I really welcome the paper and new in post, but really value the work of Health Watch. I think there's got to be a really close alignment, as you might expect, Hannah, with the HPOC programme, because often I think sometimes our sector is seen as a proxy for talking to communities, which of course it isn't, however, has the ability to reach and engage with areas of the community that often health and care can't. I think we saw during COVID the vast mobilisation of the sector and their ability to do that and have different types of conversations. So I really welcome those conversations about how we bring that together. I think that grassroots insight, because it's grassroots and because it's so diverse, is hard to capture, but actually it's so rich, and I think we need to challenge ourselves to think about, well, how might we draw on that rather than always have new conversations and new consultation, because that insight is coming through to those grassroots organisations every day.
Thank you very much. And this is a broader discussion we've had at Partnership Board as well, and thinking with our elected officials as well, and sitting with our councils as well, for our constituent feedback. We regularly meet across places and West Yorkshire level MPs who are sharing constituent concerns as well. So there's a lot, but the involvement planning brings that into focus. Okay. And what you'll note as a board as well, if you look at the place assurance reports that are coming through on item 13, you can see there that each place is now looking at their own involvement framework and how their things sit into their work as well. So seamlessly it kind of started to put well together for us in the statutory organisation. Just to say, we're very conscious that this is, as a new board, we're trying out a format, as I said. The focus on the session you can already see we've built into the board this month to see how that would work. We may try putting that up at the start of the agenda next time for November and see how that works. So we're going to, I think particularly for anyone observing what we're doing as a board, this is about trialling different formats to see how it works to achieve our aims. Okay, so colleagues, are you happy to support these 4 aims and the way we're going to do it? And it's a work in progress and we'll keep learning as we go, but there's a principle here that we use as well. Great, thank you very much. Okay, and Becky and Hannah and Harris as well, thank you very much for your involvement in this as well. Thank you. Okay, so we're going to move on to the next part of the agenda. As you'll see, I hope these aren't quite traditional, but we do have a chair and a chief exec's report. But between Rob and I, we're aiming to highlight with you good practice, developments going on in the system, and for us both connecting with our integrated care partnership, our partnership group has been established for 6 years now. So my report covers a lot around the governance arrangements that are in place, how we are aligning with our constitution from NHS England, aligning with our principles, our values and behaviours within West Yorkshire, and work on our assurance framework, which you'll hear about later, for example. I do want to just hand over to Ian Holmes briefly just to talk about the strategic refresh. So we've had a lot about this at our partnership meeting on the 6th of September when we were sitting there with our colleagues. But Ian, would you update us on that? Because that's going to come to the meeting.
Yes, Kathy, happy to. So in your pack of papers you'll have two quite detailed papers. The first is a paper we took to the partnership board describing the approach that we're taking to refreshing our 5-year strategy. And the second is a detailed report from HealthWatch colleagues setting out the insights that they've got from speaking to citizens across West Yorkshire over the past 18 months, which we're using to inform the priorities within the strategy. What's really important is it's the partnership board that owns the development of that strategy, because it's wider than just the NHS. It deals with inequalities, the social determinants of health and well-being, such as housing, employment, growth and skills. It deals with our ambitions around climate, which go much broader than just NHS partners. But it's also really clear that this ICP, this organisation, is an important partner within that partnership strategy development. So it sets out the engagement that we've done so far, including the key messages that we've heard from citizens across West Yorkshire. Access to services being a key challenge, particularly post-pandemic, both in terms of the waiting time for some people to get appointments. Concerns around workforce shortages and the impact that has on quality and accessibility of services, concerns around poverty and the cost of living and the health implications of those things. We also heard a lot around children and young people's service, particularly mental health services. A lot of that was reinforced by the private session that we had this morning, which was really, really powerful. We've also heard a lot from partners through this process. The main theme's been around continuity, so we've got 10 big ambitions that we agreed on 2.5 years ago. I think the view is that those are probably still in the right place, with a few tweaks. There was thought of the work that we're doing on it around flexibility and ability to adapt was made as well. So this is a sort of almost continuous process of engagement. We've been out to health and wellbeing boards and the health scrutiny committees over recent weeks. We'll continue to do that. We're having a development session this board in October to talk about in a bit more detail about how we work as a partnership to deliver that. And one of the other consequences of this strategy is that we'll be, as an ICB, developing a joint forward plan, and that joint forward plan will look to the NHS components of the strategy, but also respond to the national must-dos from NHS England in terms of their refresh of the long-term plan. So it's a work in progress. Really interested in thoughts and ideas either in this meeting or separately through the channels that I've described, and we'll be continuing to develop it over the next 3 or 4 months.
Thank you very much, Ian. It's a helpful update for us. And as a board, for our October private development session, we will be looking at the strategic refresh. We'll be going to our partnership group for approval in December, and then it's very much for us to have the oversight of the delivery, and you'll hear colleagues talk later, particularly our board assurance framework, where we'll have oversight of that. So thank you. Just particularly helpful for the minutes, or will you just talk about CCG and I suppose the legacy and the work that's taking place at the moment?
Yeah, of course. So the clinical commission with the CCG arrangements in respect to Q1 annual reports and accounts, that is the period related to April to June. We have been required to do submissions already on the accounts. The accounts are submitted to NHS England on the 22nd of July. Place-based final teams are currently working to complete the statutory accounts, and they were shared with the Audit Committee last week for assurance. And similarly with the annual reports, we're due to submit those on the 5th of October for the 5 former CCGs. Audit Committee also had site for assurance last week, and they will be providing that assurance alongside assurance from the place leads to the accountable officer for the signature ahead of that submission. So just to give colleagues assurance that that process is well underway.
Great. And this is due to the fact that we've had a 3-month move. We had expected to set up on the 1st of April as a new statutory organisation, which moves to the 1st of July. So thanks for colleagues for doing that legacy work. The other part of my report is a set of recommendations recommendations that have come through from our public health team that were shared at the Partnership Board meeting on the 6th of September, which many of you attended. And there were very specific recommendations from the public health team on our response as a West Yorkshire Health and Care Partnership to the cost of living crisis. And you can see in my document there, particularly pages 8 and 9, about those recommendations. Now they're completely lifted from the document on the 6th of September, but they're asking us as an integrated care board, as NHS West Yorkshire, to respond to that. Now, we probably could spend the whole afternoon talking about this, and it will be weaved into a lot of the discussions we'll have later, winter planning, for example, as we look at that and the risks within our system at the moment. But I just wanted to ask Rob to respond, because this is how we connect the partnership board and our work as NHS West Yorkshire. But I'm really open to hearing from you as well if there's any comments here in our role as this board on how we can respond to the TV.
So the first thing to do, I think, is for us to recognise that there are two planes in which we're operating here. One is with our staff, because the 100,000 people who work in the health and care system across West Yorkshire are facing the same issues as the rest of the people who live in West Yorkshire. And there are things that organisations currently are actively doing to support people with the cost of living. And Kate Sims, the Director of People, has been working with each of the organisations to compile what those sorts of issues are. So we've got organisations providing access to cash in advance of payday. We've got organisations increasing their mileage rates for certain staff, and we've got other things going on across the board. We need to think about what we do collectively, where good practices, etc. So that's the first plane, people who work for us, what we want to do and how ambitious do we want to be. And then secondly, it's what we're doing for citizens through our buying power, through our work with councils. This is as an integrated care board, as at NHS West Yorkshire, with our £5 billion of resources, or close to £5 billion allocated. How is that being spent, and how is the spending on that helping to support? A couple of practical examples from last winter, putting £1 million of our cash into boosting the winter water schemes the council have run to make them available to more people, because we know that being cold will drive people to ill health and into hospitals. And the into hospitals bit's important, but the ill health is the most important thing. And what we're trying to do here is focus on our 4 key aims as an integrated care board: outcomes, improving those outcomes and addressing inequalities in the process, looking at unwarranted variation, using our money wisely and getting the biggest economic and social return that we can. So Ian and the team from Public Health, I just went loud there. For emphasis, Ian Holmes sitting over there, and the Public Health team are looking at what's our formal response going to be and what actions we're going to take. We've got James Thomas and Robin Tundon, who are SROs for that programme, also focusing on that. So the combination of services, what we pay for, and our staff are the 2 planes that we're operating on.
Thank you. Just learning how to deal with the AV and the sound in this room. I think we've got Karen, then Becky, then Councillor Hitchcock. Thank you. And as a partnership, we look at the whole of colleagues working across health and social care across a variety of sectors. Thank you, Karen. Could I just ask colleagues, as we get used to working in this room, if you can bring the microphones a bit closer, as you can see, as you can hear me better now. Thank you, Karen. And that was something we talked about at the partnership board as well, having a broader look, and maybe Kim, you'd want to come in a minute on supporting the sustainability of the voluntary community and social enterprise sector. Becky.
Thank you. I was really shocked to see the Partnership Board graphic that demonstrated the impact of poverty on mortality and morbidity, doubling what it was during COVID. The impact on our ability to keep people well, healthy and alive is going to be really severely impacted. And I really welcome this recommendation about feeding up to national policy, but I do think we have to make this visible. That if this is going to have a real impact on people's health and on the NHS's ability to deliver health care, then we need the metrics that demonstrate that upwards, so that we make it not an invisible, where we sticking plaster over, we try and make it work, we sort of do our best we can, but we make it entirely visible about the link between people being poor and the impact on their health and well-being individually and part of our communities. And I think we have a duty to do that.
Thank you. Would you just respond on that, and then we'll come to Councillor Hinchcliffe?
Yeah, I don't know if James was responding on that point as well, but just to remind the board that one of the things that we will do increasingly is to unpack our performance by deciles of deprivation and by ethnicity, in line with the national Core 20+5 arrangements. We'll be supported in that by NHS England, who produce information on that basis. It's not quite mature enough yet, but I think, Becky, I think one of the key things to do is to mainstream the views that we take on the data. You know, if we focus just on the average, we miss what's happening at the edges.
Thank you. Okay. So I think there's more work to be done there. It might be something we want to look at as a board development session, as well as carry this theme through, and that advocacy. And just on the comments also from Public Health England asking us to work across the north of England as well. We do have support from our NHS England Regional Director, who has the remit for the whole of north of England to work alongside colleagues, and Ian Holmes, our Director of Partnerships and Strategy, and I are currently working with ICBs in other parts of the north, just to explore what we have in common. There's learning as new boards and organisations, but also we have very similar communities. So bear with us, and I'll come back, if I commit to come back at the November board to report on the progress there and working with all the colleagues. Councillor Hinchcliffe. Thank you. James, would you introduce yourself?
So I'm James Thomas, I'm the Medical Director for the RCB. So my point is just kind of pick up with Becky's point there in terms of looking at the data. I also think it's a great opportunity to how we use our population health management tools to be able to identify those people there. We know the links between health and poverty, and I think there's an opportunity not only to highlight some of the data, make sure we kind of drill down and use some of those tools to enhance us. Not only to, we know that people in poverty coming forward is difficult, extremely difficult for lots of different reasons, but actually just from pride there. So actually we can help them by actually bringing our services out to them, identifying those people, and bringing our services out using population tools. Again, it's not an opportunity to use that.
One of the things I wanted to invite you as a board to do today was to think about what the focus on topic is for our November meeting. So there are themes coming out now on population health and tackling inequality, so it may be something that we can come back to, James, for November or the January meeting. Okay. Well, and then would you come in afterwards? Well,
sorry, I was just going to respond to Councillor Hinchcliffe's points and clarify that 100,000 is everybody, so it's all of the health and care staff, irrespective of who you're employed by. And I think there is something about recognising on things like the VCSE and on staffing we've got good form, going into the COVID pandemic, a lot of a reduction in income for voluntary sector organisations as retail arms were closed and so on. And we actively resourced, put money, real money, into the VCSE to support people through that process, and had a VCSE-led set of programmes around the state of the sector. It feels like we're in that sort of space again. And what I would suggest, Cathy, is as part of this conversation, we come back with what the plan is next time. I don't think we can have a focus on. I think we have to have a commitment to act and see what the actions are going to be and agree them.
That would be really welcome. Thank you. Kim.
I barely need to come in because everybody's done my job for me.
That's good.
So thank you all. I mean, it very much echoes what all my colleagues are saying in the sector. 95% of our sector are small or micro organisations, but they are those organisations that reach people close to where they live. And they are the people who are there whatever happens. It doesn't matter if people don't tick a box or fit a criteria. So it's certainly it's hand in glove with the BCS sustainability piece because of the work that we can't afford to lose. Not just for the sake of sustaining those organisations in itself. I think there's the challenge of investment and the amount of the finance that follows and the mechanisms that to reach those groups, but there is something about some decisions and brave decisions that we could take collectively as a board and in place about how we might work differently with the sector, and those things don't take money actually. The changes in principles of working and the way that we make decisions. So through the Harnessing the Power of Communities programme, very much welcome a conversation about how we take some of that forward.
Okay. Hannah. Okay, which is going to, it's a theme throughout. That's what you're encouraging us to do today. Thank you, and that links with Rob's commitment to action as well. Robin.
Yeah, Robin Tuddenham, place lead for Calderdale and also the chief exec of Calderdale Council. We do need data, but I would say that we're rich in data. You could go now onto our DataWorks website, you could go down to ward level and street level in terms of the levels of people with full and fear poverty claims up to 3 months ago. So the local authorities are rich in data. The ONS is incredibly sophisticated about all of this as well. And I would just sort of plea and support Rob's call to action because we don't have much time. And we're talking about a ward in central Halifax with 1 in 3 people in full and fear poverty now in September. And so we are moving into this in a changing national and regional context of the economy and the impact of the response to the economy. So I just think the next conversation focused on what might be the action, what might be the levers, and what might be the experiences we listen to and prioritise, and be quite overt about where we focus our efforts and our thinking.
Great. Robin, thank you. I think between you and Rob, you're encouraging us, which we look at later in our risk appetite, is sometimes we need to be bold, and that's what you're both encouraging us to do, so thank you. Majid, will you wait?
Just a couple of quick things. So the first one is about the
Majid, would you bring the mic?
Review of the 5-year strategy. It'd be good to get a feel of where we really succeeded and where we struggled, and also what were the enablers and what were the barriers, just to help if we could get a flavour of some of the learning taken forward. And the second thing, which is a different topic, I'm just looking at the graphic on page 7, and it's talking about the impact we're going to have in 10 to 15 years on tackling breaking the cycle of inequality in school readiness. and it feels very, very uncomfortable that another generation is going to live through all of that. And I'm not even sure whether that graphic incorporates the current challenges in terms of cost of living, inflation, etc., whether that's going to be even longer. And obviously there's a lot of work going on behind this, and so it just feels very, very uncomfortable that length of time seeing that progress.
Thank you. And I suppose one of my final points was that it's something that came out of our partnership meeting, both from Rob's Chief Exec's report and this report, was what are we going to do in the next few months, which Robin is your point, what are we going to do in the next 2 years, and then what are we going to do in the next 5 to 10 years. And I do feel our work together should always have that 5 to 10 year view, but I'm really pleased that we're having a discussion about what are we going to do this week. And Councillor Hinchcliffe and I have been talking last week and this week about what we're going to do now, and what could we record today, as well as what can we do between now and the next meeting in public in November.
Well, genuinely, there's work going on, as Councillor Hinchcliffe alluded to, and Robbie, in every place on this agenda. And what we've got to look at is what, over and above that, do we need to do as we're setting out our plans for the future and plans for the winter. So I think our winter planning, this has got to be an element of, and we've got to take action on, including recognising some of the barriers, etc. What I would suggest from the board is that we allow the Oversight and Assurance Group and the places to crack on with that within their delegated authority, and bring back any barriers that there are to short-term actions, and we'll come up with some collective bold decisions that we might need to take going into the winter. But I think if we use the mainstream processes and make this part of it around winter planning, the operational plan that we've got to do for the next couple of years, that would be very helpful. But, you know, I'm sure if you ask Tim Riley or Robin, you know, what are you doing in your place on this, they'll be able to tell you, you know, Leeds doing this, or Mel can tell you what you're doing in Wakefield. There's work going on right now to help. But let's not wait for the board to make the decisions and choices. Let's use the delegate authority in the places to get on with it now.
Great, thank you. The document does invite some board members to form a task and finish group. This is connected back to our partnership board. So I'd say if you are interested, please contact myself or Rob. I suppose that we're having some critical friends going through this process before we then meet again in November. But thank you, colleagues, for that discussion. That was really, really welcomed. Thank you. And that will connect them back to our partnership board in December. Okay. I imagine we won't lose that point on the strategic refresh. We can be in October, and that will come in November. We'll then see it at partnership board in December. Okay. Thank you. Right. I'm going to hand over to you now, Rob, for your Chief Exec's report.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. So I've introduced myself already. You've got the report in front of you, and you've had it for a week, so I'm presuming that you've been able to find the time to read it. But I do want to highlight just a few points. First is to say a big thank you to everyone around the table. You're all leading organisations or representing sectors that have supported each other and people over the weekend. It's been really powerful. And I think it's one of the things that I want us to hold on to, that our system is made up of the people in it. And in all of the work that we do, we talked earlier about what is the citizen's experience. We've also got to keep in view what's our staff's experience. And every time we ask them to do something, they seem to pull it off. But that's not cost-free for them or for us. So we need to make sure that we recognise their efforts. We say thank you. And I'd just like to recognise, through you, all of their efforts over the weekend and yesterday. If you read the report, it feels like, after the Queen's funeral yesterday, it feels like we're all about to get back into business after a period of some reflection. And the report reflects some of the work that we're going to have to take account of. And you don't have to go far to see that things are stretched, that people are working incredibly hard. You probably don't have to go very far to get some good experiences for people, but you won't hear about them in the media, and you won't hear about them talked about much. But people are still getting good care today, people are still getting safe care today, people are getting access to care. But too many people aren't. That's the problem. So as a board, I would really like us to make sure that we don't lose sight of the fact that some people, the majority of people, get good care. But now in this period, what I've set out in the report is the sort of 7 things I want us to consider. So the first And most important, I would say, for this board around this table, is that we always focus on safety. You know, as an accountable officer, I always used to ask myself when I woke up, is it going to be safe today? And I know that all of you will be exercised by and want to focus on, are our services safe? And then next question is, can people access them, and do they deliver good, effective care? So I think we should be having that conversation explicitly throughout the conversations today, and we should always have it at the forefront of our mind. Second is that we do have some new political leadership, and we would anticipate, again following the period of mourning, that that leadership will start to communicate what it wants from the health and care system. And you can see in the report that the incoming Secretary of State for Health and Care, and let's remember this is the Secretary of State for Health and Care, is interested in 4 things primarily: the ABCD, ambulance response times, dealing with the backlog, care and access to doctors and dentists. That means GPs and dentists in the community. And you could argue that, you know, that seems like a very short list, there's no end for nursing and all that sort of stuff. Or we could just actually reflect that when you look at Health Watch's reports, the partnership board last month, people, the public, talked about worrying that an ambulance might not turn up. People talked about being able to get an access to a GP, being able to get good, fast access to planned care, and you know, the state of social care. They were all on their list. Now we anticipate that this week we'll get some further information around what this means in practice. And there's also speculation, and it's no more than that at this point, that there'll be some kind of winter plan or statement this week. So we should recognise that as a system, as a health and care system, with a Secretary of State and a new Secretary of State of the Department for Community and Local Government as well, that we are buffeted by politics. It's a political agenda, it's a political issue, it always will be, because it matters to people. We also should note that one thing hasn't changed in the last few weeks, and that's the expectations on organisations and systems like ours is increasing. So the expectation is this is the place, these are the organisations, these are the systems that are going to get things done. Because if the issue for us is that people can't get access to a hospital bed because it's got somebody in it who shouldn't be there, which means that people can't be accessing the bed for A&E, which means that there's problems getting people out of the ambulance into A&E. That might be down to issues in the care system or community services, the type that Karen runs. Who's going to sort that out? It's got to be a system response to those issues. So there's an expectation nationally from NHS England and others that we are it when it comes to looking at how the system works, how we resolve that ABCD for the politicians, how we resolve the things that citizens tell us are important to them. And we should note that, and that responsibility that places on us here, in our places, and in our sectors. We've already talked about the fact that we're going through a process now about dealing with today, thinking about the winter, thinking about a 2-year operational plan and a 5-year strategy. That's all the same conversation. It's all part of the same conversation. So I just wanted to board members to clock that's part of the same conversation. We're not just focused on now. We don't just focus on the future. Everything we do has got to be lined up. And Ian and the team with Lou and colleagues from NHS England are making sure that that's the case, and increasingly, as we discussed at the partnership board, aligning that with council and local government planning processes. We talked about the cost of living crisis earlier. The impact upon our council colleagues is substantial going into the winter and into next year. Another new thing for us really is that our role on capital expenditure. We've got about 160 million, give or take a couple of million, to invest in local capital schemes. That's for us to plan for and for us to deal with, and that's what we're doing. We've also got several £100 million of national capital coming our way, which we have to keep making sure we're on track with. And it's important that we do focus on that. As we've discussed at a development day, the infrastructure of digital and the buildings and spaces that we inhabit is critically important for our future. Just to clock that the vaccination programme for COVID is going, the autumn vaccination programme started, and we should be grateful for that, and COVID is still with us. Last time I looked, there was about 160 people in hospital with COVID. We had plateaued about 200 at the time I was writing the report, but it's coming down still. We'll see what happens with the next wave, but we would continue to encourage everybody to get vaccinated. And this is another one where if we look at the average, it looks good. But if you look at people with a learning disability, people who live in deprived communities, people from Black Caribbean, Black African, Bangladeshi, Pakistani heritage, it doesn't look as good. So there's work to do there, and we'll keep focused on that work. And finally, probably most importantly, we are in a period we have to genuinely look after our teams, our staff, the volunteers who support them, the unpaid carers who work with them, and families. Because the environment's a difficult one, and we've got an exacerbation of that environment because we've got potential for industrial action. Because of the Queen's passing, the ballot, I understand from the RCN, around industrial action has been withdrawn for now, but will be reinstated, I presume, very shortly. So at this stage, we're entering a period where one of our biggest assets could, for the first time in a long time, be withheld from us for some elements of the day, or completely. So we need to keep that in view. So in this context, then, the decisions that we make here, the plans that we make here are critically important, and the expectations being placed on us are significant. I didn't want to say anything other than that, really. There's a lot of detail in the report. We'll come on later to talk about performance, risk, and strategy, etc. But the report hopefully sets out the context for the meeting today.
Thank you very much, Rob. Bev, would you introduce yourself?
Well, my name is Beverly Geary. I'm Director of Nursing for West Yorkshire. I just want to talk about your point that you made right at the beginning, Rob, around making safety our first consideration. It's at the bottom of page 3 of the report. And you do reference the Quality Committee in that paragraph. Just for members of the public, I just wanted to also kind of flag that there are a number of really well-established committees that already meet within West Yorkshire and predate actually the board, and also predate some of the board members' tenure. So, for example, we've got a really well-established system quality group that meets on a monthly basis. We've got a really well-established clinical forum chaired by Dr. Thomas that meets on a monthly basis. Those two are really mature. The Quality Committee is meeting next week. We've got Majid, who's going to be the independent chair of that, and we welcome the challenge from that. And then if we look at the other papers, and again, you've referenced one in particular in this, but if you look at the other papers in the rest of the part, some of the specific risks, so ambulance services, etc., workforce, maternity, we've got boards that, again, well established, LMS board that talks about risks within that service. There is a regional, so really strong West Yorkshire membership on a regional group that meets weekly, an executive group for ambulance services to look at specific risks and mitigations of risk. I just thought to kind of note that for the public is really, really important. And then the other thing that I wasn't going to say, but I'm going to, is thanks for referencing that a lot of patients get really good care. Yeah, we get it wrong sometimes. Yes, we hear feedback from patients, too many patients, but every time I go into, whether it's a practice or a hospital or a ward, and I speak to patients, they're getting good care. The staff are really proud to deliver that. I just wanted to make that point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bev. Does anyone have any questions or comments on Rob's report as Chief Exec? Jane, would you introduce yourself and then we'll come to you, Asa?
Yeah, hi, thanks. I'm Jane. I'm one of the non-exec members and chair of the Audit Committee. Thanks, Rob, for the section in terms of capital investment, and it is really pleasing to see that there are so many sort of national schemes as well that the region is going to benefit from. Conscious that one of the schemes ahead there is one that also comes up later in the risk register, and I don't know whether now or later it would be possible just to give a little bit in terms of where things are in that kind of process. The paper on risk at this stage is more about, you know, where we are with the process, but I don't think we've got much to comment on exactly what's happening. So either now or in the finance or in the risk paper, that'd be helpful, please.
I'd welcome doing that now. I'd written the same question down, Jane. Thank you.
I don't know if Mel wants to start with what Bradford and Airedale Place is doing around the issues to do with the hospital, and then we can pick up on the capital process.
Thanks, Rob and Chair. I'm Mel Pickup and I'm place-based lead for Bradford District and Craven and also Chief Executive Bradford Teaching Hospitals. So as a place, the reason why we will be talking about it later, we recognise that one of our biggest risks across our place is the fragility of the fabric of Airedale Hospital. It is well known, it has been talked about widely by their board. It is the subject of a bid to the centre for monies to rebuild the hospital and to make it safe. We are, as a place, the recipients of a phased approach, I think it's fair to say, to capital that will, over time, enable us to create a safer environment and decant facilities to enable works to be ongoing, but that is a very protracted way of solving a very immediate problem. And increasingly we are aware that there are issues that have been compounded by the recent heat wave, followed by the rigours of a lot of rain. We will shortly be getting into a winter period where there will be probably more adverse weather conditions which accelerate the degeneration of the fabric of the building and give rise to increasingly greater risk of that building failing. And that's indiscriminate. It could happen anywhere at any time, and so therefore the measures that are in place is a constant vigilance and monitoring by the Trust, conversations that are ongoing with colleagues in the regional quality summits that we have and the safety summits that we have to outline the mitigations that we are able to put in place and the contingencies for such an event that would require parts or sectors of the hospital to have to potentially be evacuated, and that will require surrounding hospitals to be in a position to provide supporting services. So as a place we have our own board on the 29th of September, to which Faluki, the Chief Executive of Airedale, will be presenting a paper that describes in more detail how we as a place can work together to mitigate some of these risks and to protect patients and to protect staff and to protect services, conscious that there is still a need for us to escalate to this board and for this board to help in lobbying for a solution that is more substantial and more permanent.
Thank you very much, Mel. That was very comprehensive and articulate. Thank you. Bev.
Just to add to Mel's point, the emergency planning response and resilience group are also talking about this risk and about how, as West Yorkshire, we might need to respond as well. So it's just to add to that.
Thank you. Just for Councillor Hinchcliffe and then Jonathan, could we come to you on how money works and how Mel talked about Central and we talked about West Yorkshire, and I just think colleagues and anyone watching the meeting would welcome understanding that. Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yeah, I just wonder, as West Yorkshire, how do we escalate it quickly? Because obviously we've all been pushing it for quite some time now. We realise it's a change in government, but now probably is the opportunity to push it still further. So it is something that we're all concerned about, and obviously anything we can do collectively to raise that voice nationally, I'll be happy for us to do that, please.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll come back to you. Bev.
Just again to add, so I should have said this is not, when we're talking about escalating quality and safety risks, this has been escalated on our region, on our West Yorkshire risks So that will go to the regional committee, which is the week after next. And collectively, all of the regions come together and escalate at national level. So there will be, I'm sure there will be various other avenues, but that's one avenue that we've already explored.
Great, thank you very much. I have raised it with the Minister over the summer, Maria Caulfield MP, who was within Department of Health and Social Care, and I'll be raising it with the person who was taken over from her in the refreshed government this week. I know that each trust who has capital needs, particularly Airedale, has been doing their own lobbying with their local MPs. I know Robbie Moore MP has been very supportive of their work and vocal. I know you have, Councillor Hinchcliffe, as well. So I think we just perhaps revisit that once you've had your place meeting. Perhaps then we could let us know how we can help and support that. I just want to hand over to Jonathan to explain the differences here. Some ways it's within our power and our control, isn't it? And sometimes we're waiting for central resources.
That's right, Cathy. So I'm Jonathan, I'm Director of Finance. I'll come to the Airedale issue at the end, if that's okay. So Rob gave a little bit of thoughts about the position on capital. We will obviously be using the finance investment policy to dig in. We do we receive £158 million for capital. We collectively agree with 10 trusts about how that and we use a sort of framework of prioritisation and risk assessment to do that. And we do have system oversight of that, and previously we used something called a system and oversight insurance group to do that. In the new world, if you like, we using the Finance Committee, to do that. And that money is really about day-to-day capital replacement, refresh of medical equipment, refresh of capital, refresh of IT, and fairly fundamental capital works. What it doesn't allow the flexibility to do some of any particularly sort of big schemes. And to be honest, because it's quite constrained, it hasn't been used in the past to develop things that are West Yorkshire wide, but we required central funding for those things. So we have 158 million. We also get access to a range of funding for capital, and they're really around supporting policy development, supporting initiatives that the centre want us to consider. So for this year we will benefit from capital for community diagnostic centres, we'll benefit for capital for surgical hubs, for additional facilities, etc. And those aren't always that predictable. You know, they might be on sort of 2-3 year sort of timeline, and obviously we work together through private services, through the trusts, and through places to access that cash. The last route, which in some ways the RAC sort of scheme sits into, is around those big hospital developments. Now, we were fortunate, we were successful in receiving just short of £200 million a number of years ago to support the developments at Huddersfield Royal Infirmary, which is the new A&E, and the developments at Royal Hospital. And that's the process that's been followed for that. And we are just on the cusp now of waiting for approval for the OBC for that second stage developments at Coverdale Royal Hospital. Leeds Teaching Hospitals were fortunate to get secure some £1.2 billion of funding for the new developments at Leeds, and again we are waiting for OBC approval at this stage. The Airedale Hospital scheme has been dealt with, I would say, on a more of a piecemeal phased approach. So there is some limited funding available to address some of the more immediate risks, but that long-term funding package for the Airedale Hospital hasn't yet been secured. Now, we did have the opportunity last October to submit proposals for the next wave of the new hospital programme in the Airedale scheme, alongside many other schemes in West Yorkshire were put forward. And we, like other ICSs in the country, are still waiting to understand what the timelines and what the next stage in that process is.
Thank you. I thought that would be helpful to colleagues to understand. And we also have other capital priorities, Bradford Teaching Hospital, Bradford District Cares and for mental health. hospital as well. So thank you for sharing that. I think if we just take the next few working days just to regroup and work out how we can play a role in lobbying and influencing that. Well,
Yeah, I wouldn't want us to leave this bit of the conversation thinking that people are at risk who are in Airedale at the moment. So we've got works that are in place at the moment to deal with some of the infrastructure issues, and the structural engineers in place providing support to the Trust for that continuous monitoring. I do think that there's been real benefit. If you think of that story we've just heard, we've got the Directors of Finance collectively working to a common estate strategy and agreeing priorities, which has then allowed us to present a single voice to government, which has then responded appropriately. So CHFT, Caldwell Huddersfield Foundation Trust going forward, Leeds Hospitals going forward, etc. So if we can get behind the Airedale Bradford developments, because it's not, as we've heard, the reinforced autoclaved aerated concrete rack, you hear that phrase, it's light as a feather, it's really light, it's like styrofoam, but it's not suitable. We're 52 years into a 30-year lifespan for a building. It's not going to, we've got to be out there by 2030. That's not the only thing in the system. Mel runs a trust which has got Victorian architecture in it. It's the last one in West Yorkshire that hasn't really been updated. And Linfield Mount just isn't where we want it to be as a mental health facility. So we need to continue to get behind all of these developments. Because when we do, we end up with things like Redkite View, which Sarah's organisation runs, which is such a fantastic co-produced, award-winning environment, which staff are proud to work in and people like to use.
thank you. Tom, would you introduce yourself?
Thanks, I'm Tom Ridden, I'm the Chief Executive of Leeds City Council. I'm here as the lead local authority Chief Executive of Yorkshire. I was just going to say, we certainly support getting behind and Bradford from the Leeds perspective. And I just was reflecting, how do we, because there'll be a lot of different parts of the country in similar situations, how do we get ahead? And I think the link to growth is quite a key part of a lot of the health developments that we've got in this part of the world. And I know Bradford have got plans, we have in Leeds, so I think the more we can focus on that, as well as the core purpose of the hospitals themselves, I think that will help us in the, when it eventually gets to the centre and the Treasury and everyone else. So maybe just see if there's a some of the parts thing that we could do, particularly with the CA combined authority.
Thank you very much. It's very much around the investment into our local communities, having to delivering up agenda and the growth that can come from that investment as well. Thank you. Okay. I appreciate that discussion already. AC, were you waiting very patiently? Would you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Dr. I'm Nanshu Janaki, Independent Non-Executive Chair. First, I have one observation and a couple of questions. But I would like to comment on the report of this report that captures the depth and breadth of this stuff. So, thank you. The first one was about point 2.2.3, which is about discharge and flow. And you sort of observed there a key function of the integrated care system. Can you hear now? Is better? Thank you.
Did you miss all those nice things you just said about it?
Very complimentary.
So I can repeat the nice things again if you want. It is well deserved. So in terms of a key function, I think when the narrative of the integrated care systems and started was about flow and discharge effectively. And there is sort of few observations you make. So this is my request, thinking about future reports, where in the performance report there is depth about sort of intercellent report and stats for each places. Is there a way to articulate that better as a whole system, how we are improving flow and discharge across the system? So it could be quantitative or qualitative, but over a period of next 5 years, it will be useful to demonstrate how that, because I think that was one of the key fundamental principles for setting this up. So that's the first sort of request and observation. Secondly, there is a note about access to general practice and satisfaction levels. So the question related to that is what we are doing in order to sort of improve that and what steps we have taken across the system.
So I'm going to cheat at this point and suggest that on the first of those, it'd be good to get some reflections from some of the places about what they'd be considering, because if you look at Bradford's and Mel's system, it does really well comparatively if you look at the country. And then if you look at Leeds and their system, it's not doing so well on that metric. It's doing brilliantly on things like ambulance turnaround, A&E, but not so well on discharge and flow. So I didn't know if anybody, Mel, Tim, Carol, or Tim wanted to say anything about what's going on in place around, or Calderdale, with Robin, what you're looking at in terms of those measures of success around discharge.
Mel.
Thank you, Chair. Melanie Brown, Director of System Reform for Integration for Wakefield Place. We began a discharge programme, which we got accelerated in Wakefield, and some of the schemes that we're looking at bringing in Wakefield for this winter, which will go live on 1st October, is looking at bringing our council social care reablement team together with our community services team, and we're hoping that will support our discharges in the community. We've also got a very creative domiciliary care and bridging scheme about to start. And we're also looking at, we've been really creative with having Jo as budget holder across both social care, community services, to do something very creative with integrated teams to support our discharge programme. The other area that we really know we need to focus on is obviously getting our right to reside numbers down, and we're doing some significant work to ensure that our patients, wherever they are getting the care that they need in the right place. But we are conscious that's an area that we are going to be focused on, and is our priority for Wakefield in the coming months. I'm happy to bring a further report to the board if needed, Rob.
So, and I wondered, Sarah, if you wanted to say anything about the really good work that's going on in mental health with Flow, which has similar barriers to overcome.
Yeah, thank you. Sarah Monroe, Chief Executive of the Yorkshire Partnership Trust. Here on the board is we work for mental health, learning disability and autism. We did share to the System Leadership Group quite a complex array of services really in terms of mental health, ranging from children and young people, inpatient TAFL CAMs, through to specialist seating disorder units, forensic pathways, older adults and adult inpatients. And each one of those really having to play with a different set of partners. So what's been really key is that the decisions and the ownership of getting pathways and decisions to admit right, decisions to discharge right, needs to be led by the experts within that service, connecting with the right partners, whether that's in some cases children's social care or whether it's the Ministry of Justice in our forensic pathways. So it was really hard to try and capture it all, but really we wanted to give colleagues the assurance that we've got the right people in place leading on those, and where we do encounter obstacles or challenges, that they would be flagged in different places. So the work that we do in Leeds, focusing around our older adult pathway flow, or with housing partners to get access to specialist supportive housing for people with complex mental health problems. So sometimes it can be small in number but big impact in a small number of, because they are all very specialist services in their own right.
Karen, I don't know if you want to say something given the programme you're leading.
good progress. There's still much to do. If you look at the numbers, it's still really hard to do it every day. So there is real focus around that. And we're working really hard at building safe activity around virtual walls, care, be able to communicate children in immediate response. So there's a lot of work going on here. The group has got some more traction, but it was looking for them to think about how we can where they look to their own place or their own place. So I'm looking at the yeah, Lou, will you introduce yourself? I'm conscious of time, so AC, did you have another point?
I have another question, but...
Okay, so if we let Lou respond, then we'll take that question and then we'll then conclude that this item. Lou.
And it's really important to understand how the discharge numbers do not reflect how the system is struggling with pressures across the whole pathway, or how in fact actually it's not a hospital metric alone. And I think that's probably what Karen was trying to get over and has done really well. But we will be picking that one back up again because it is one of the metrics that we've been asked to focus on as part of the board assurance framework, and we'll have trajectories on those. Thank you.
Thank you. Well,
so if the board are happy, I'd suggest that the Finance, Investment and Performance Committee agrees the indicators that need to be reflected in the balance scorecard on discharge and flow.
And I wonder if our Integrated Care Board Quality Committee might want to have a look at those.
For an experiential.
Yeah, experiential and quality and safety and AC, last point then.
Thank you. So I'll pick up on the access to GP services later, but I had another question around the surgical hubs. So there's a significant investment going in the capital of setting these hubs up. My question was about capacity to deliver in terms of resourcing. Given that the recommendation is also to increase capacity within existing infrastructure by evening and weekends, booking for evening and weekends. Do we have enough systemic capacity to deliver those services once those places are up and running?
So that's been one of the assurances required during the process and the bids. And we've got people around the table who are going to be running some. I don't know, Mel, if you want to say anything about the process in Bradford.
So I think part of the delay has been awaiting the final approval, and I can speak in the case of Bradford District and Craven, because our scheme in St Luke's Hospital requires us to actually demolish some premises, and to start doing that we needed to be very clear that the funding was going to be available, so we couldn't start that work. And then I think we all appreciate that at this present time it's quite difficult to engage the construction industry in the way that previously it has been quite easy to do post-COVID. So there has been a bit of a delay in us starting, but we are taking account of that going forward. I think that in answer to the question about are we actually able to I think what you're asking is, could we not do that in existing capacity?
Yes, partly, and also do have enough doctors and nurses.
Well, I'll answer the first bit, which could we do it in existing capacity? The answer to that is no, not for us, because our constraining factor in Bradford is the number of acute beds. Because we've got a finite number of acute beds that have to deal with such things as the winter pressures as well as COVID, etc. And in part, that's led to our backlog, because we don't have any protected elective capacity. This is why this particular scheme is important, because it will be ring-fenced and its only job will be to do elective activity. And in terms of the workforce, the answer is we are working really hard to get the workforce in place to correspond with the go-live of that facility, and it will be challenging, but we will be working really hard to do that with Kate and our respective HR teams and our workforce development people.
Thank you very much. We'll make sure we pick up on primary care later. Okay. We're going to move on now. Thank you very much for the report, Rob. Board is being asked to make sure we continually consider safety risks and issues in all of our conversations, including the meeting today. And we can also pick up certain items in the policy discussion as well as what's highlighted in places. And I think, AC, your point then is that we might have a mix of statistics and anecdotal information. There's some great case studies around the room there that we perhaps can pick up on for learning as well. Okay, thank you. I'm going to move us on now to our item on the board assurance framework. This is evidence of our work in progress as a new board. So, Laura, over to you.
Thank you. So I'm just going to introduce briefly the report. So the ICB as an organisation, we need to take many decisions and we need to be able to manage the risks that are associated with those decisions. And over the last few months, we've spent time in development mode exploring our approach to developing the board assurance framework. I'm going to refer to it as BAF after this, just so I don't have to keep saying it. We've provisionally agreed that we will be having a single BAF across the ICB and that the actions and mitigations will predominantly be at our place level. In the development sessions that we've had, we've identified 15 proposed strategic risks, and today's report is seeking approval of those from the board formally. And we've also spent time developing our risk appetite framework. By defining our risk appetite, it will help us to be able to maximise those opportunities there are for improvement, as well as effectively mitigate against our risks. The risk appetite, as it's explained in the report, is not a single fixed concept. So a single high-level statement wouldn't be sufficient really in order to be able to articulate our approach to risk as an organisation. And we are therefore proposing a risk appetite framework that's based on 4 levels of risk appetite, and they're set out within the paper. We have spent time in development applying those 4 risk appetite statements to the 15 proposed strategic risks. And again, we are asking today that the board formally approves those. And then the final thing I just wanted to mention that is covered within the report is around how we support the next stage of developing the BAF as a document. And we are proposing that we set up a task and finish group that is we're in the process of establishing at the moment, and that group would work over the next few weeks, so from today's board meeting through to our next board meeting in November, to be able to develop the BAF for submission formally to our next board meeting. I've got a final thing, which is just around the Audit Committee. So the Audit Committee had the opportunity to spend some time last week reflecting on the development of the BAF so far and seeing some of this detail. And they have offered to share with the task and finish group their feedback on the development of the risk appetite. And I was just going to check whether our chair of Audit Committee wanted to provide any feedback from that meeting. Jane.
Suggestions from colleagues at that point and come back with any further updates to the board meeting in November to cover that. I guess the one thing I would also say is the importance of how we use the BAF at the board meeting, but also once we've locked it down for each of the strategic risks through the committee structure. So the importance of having a lead committee, whether it be quality committee, finance, performance, investment, the board itself, and that they own the sort of monitoring and managing of those strategic risks is really important, and hopefully will start to feed into the driving the agendas of the subcommittees as much as it may do at the board itself. But more of that to come, I'm sure, as we take it.
Okay. Thank you very much, Jane. Are there any comments or questions at all? Seeking your support for this approach? Ian?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Kathleen. Thanks, Laura. I'm really supportive. I think it's good progress so far because it's quite a complicated thing, isn't it? I guess I'm really interested in how we, distill and route bold action. So if we're saying we want to be bold on inequalities and on the diversity, inclusion, gender. Where do we generate the ideas? What would be really bold, and how do we do that? And I think that's a conversation probably we could take into the strategy development session in October, because I'd like our strategy to be able to articulate some of the big ideas and some of that bold action. So I'm really supportive, but I think it's understanding what we need in this context.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And for the context of anyone watching this meeting, we had a private board development session in Wakefield in August where we were looking at risk appetite. So one is that Laura is recommending a framework for us, those 4 ways in which that we could set our appetite as well as against our strategy. So yes, Ian, and bold, what does it mean in action and delivery, and do we have examples now, and what would we like to see in the future? Okay. Any other comments or questions at all? No? Just to note, round this table, our task and finish group so far includes Ian, Tim Riley, Place Lead for Leeds, myself and Laura and Jane as Audit Chair. But we've also invited in Audit Yorkshire. We have Chris Reeve, who is the Company Secretary at Nakala, who's joining us. And we've also invited the Audit Chair of Yorkshire Ambulance Service and Bradford District Care, who holds a dual role there as well. So we're inviting in some members of our partnership as well, which is a similar way in which we've gone about our remuneration and nominations committee. If anyone else wants to be involved, please let us know. Rob?
Not volunteering to be involved,
Oh,
much,
okay.
Much as I like this kind of stuff, genuinely. I just wondered how it fits with the conversation we had about keeping people at the centre, and whether there's opportunity to get some Foundation Trust governors or other people who've got some understanding of this kind of approach to provide their perspective.
I think it's really helpful, thank you. Perhaps we can reach out to our company secretary network and then find out which public or staff governors may want to get involved. Thank you. Okay. So that will come back to the November meeting, some work over the next 2 months, and it will link in with the next board development session on strategy as well. And I leave it with you all to have a think through how we can be bold in our work on those 4 purposes and integrated care system. Thank you. And thank you for all that work. It's been a lot of work already. Okay, we now move on to item 9 on the agenda, which is our integrated care system finance strategy. So Jonathan, would you give us some highlights? This is about looking at the principles of our finance strategy, isn't it?
It is, thank you. So I'll keep the introduction quite brief to allow maximum time for discussion. So just a few points I want to make really. So the strategy as drafted builds on the work and the principles previously adopted and discussed within the partnership. And what it's really trying to get to is how we allocate and deploy and make the best use of the £5 billion of resource that we get across the health and care sector. And it's really trying to focus on and what difference will it make against the 4 mission statements of reducing health inequalities, managing variation in care, and so on. So that's really what it's there to do. It's very much seen as an enabling strategy to the 5-year strategy work, and because of that, it is possible that as that 5-year strategy work emerges across the next few months, we'll be required to go back and reiterate the finance strategy in some way, and I think that's okay. It's also very much about providing a sense of direction and purpose for the development of finance strategies at place as well, recognising that the resource decisions around the £5 billion of resource, 95% of it, if not more, are taken by places as opposed to across West Yorkshire. I guess the other bit is around the strategy is one thing, and the systems and the processes and the controls that we might describe, but actually making this happen is all about the connections and the relationships, and it's that supporting set of behaviours and ambition behind this that will really make the difference as opposed to a written strategy. And the final thing is it's really brought today for discussion, for comment. It is still very much in draft. It can iterate across the next few months. And I just look forward to contributions and comments, really.
Okay, thank you very much. And this builds on work of many months and years, and particularly your role in our system as well, Jonathan, which we appreciate. Does anyone have any comments at all on what's being proposed? Becky, then Carol.
Thanks, Jonathan. A couple of things in the papers. We primarily have a better understanding of parts of our system than others. So when you're talking here about benchmarking and identifying variation, working with clinicians and partners, actually it would be really good to have some idea what that means for primary care, because otherwise we're going to neglect the primary care elements of this. So we know we've got vastly different funding mechanisms, or vastly different funding available to different communities in terms of primary care across West Yorkshire. So understanding that and the variation, that would be really helpful, Jonathan. And then the second thing is that we've got a lovely principle here about equitable distribution of resources, but we know that we've got historic inequity in distribution of resources. So not just about health inequalities, but just where money goes for what. And we've heard this morning about a sort of legacy around children and young people, that we historically have funded those services less well than other services. So it would be good to know what the mechanisms will be in place in terms of ensuring that our funding is, I suppose, at least equitable to our entire population.
Thank you, Becky. And I suppose in being very open about the ways in which we're working with communities, understanding that there are certain communities that are highly deprived, and we need to put them in a certain way, and sometimes funding formulas perhaps don't quite work in that way. So Jonathan and Rob, would you respond on that?
So I think Becky's question sort of poses part of the problem. I think we've got lots of data around primary care, and we've got lots of data around children. I'm not sure if we have significantly underfunded children's services, or whether relatively we've put more or less in because we haven't had that analysis, and that's part of the issue, I would say. So the formula that we use to allocate resources in the NHS is pretty reasonable. It's independently produced and it's validated, and it's based on the best evidence of individual person-based needs, which are then amalgamated into populations of any size that you want. The big problem is the formula is one thing, but how much money has been allocated in reality in the past and spent in the past. And I know some people around the table will understand this in great detail, and some people who are the mystery. And what we have over time is we've got a target which is based on the allocation, and then we've got what you actually get at the moment, which is your distance from the target. And depending on how much money you've got, you can move back towards the target by giving people differential growth. And Jonathan and the team have agreed already this year that we'll make some movement, not substantial given the differentials, between the difference between the actual, what the formula says, and what the actual spend is being. But we are making some moves. But that's going to be the critical point, is how quick can you move towards what you think the ideal should be. And that's where some of the bravery, the decisions and choices come in. And that's where I think some of the collective recommendations of the finance community is incredibly helpful, and where we're going to have to be very clear and open and transparent and open to challenge around what the consequences are and what the actions are that follow, I would say. So I think this is where the rubber hits the road, doesn't it? If we're going to move money around, which we have done, then we have to have a degree of trust, a degree of openness, and we need to come back to what did you do with the money and did it make a difference?
Thank you, Jonathan.
Yeah, just to build on that, just two points, right? Right, we have, I'm not sure if the phrase is move money around, but we've applied a local determination to how the West Yorkshire pound, because we do that £5 billion that I referred to, that comes in now through the ICS, through the ICB. It's not explicitly designed for CCGs or for places. We make a decision as an ICB about how that's done. Now, what we've done really successfully in the last few years is acting that way, but acting that way across the 10 trusts and the 5 CCGs, acting in concert, coming to collective decision making. And whilst the formal responsibility sits with this board, I'm really keen that we keep that principle in place, because that's the thing that gives it the credibility and the authority and the ownership, really. So I suppose that's one thing. I guess the second thing is just for and again, it's just for clarity. So whilst we talk about place-based allocations or place budgets in West Yorkshire, because that's absolutely the way that we run, that's not the way that we're viewed nationally by NHS England. NHS England will look at West Yorkshire. West Yorkshire ICB is a statutory organisation. We decide collectively to set it up on a place-based basis.
This might give us some latitude.
Okay. Carol, then Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Thank you, thanks. I'm Carol McKenna, I'm producing the 50s. So maybe just continuing on the theme slightly, actually. Just first of all, Jonathan, just wanted to say thank you to your finance team for putting this together. I think it's really accessible to the finance strategy. As a compliment. But I think that reflects the dialogue and the work that went into it. So obviously it was brought back into our place, and we had a conversation in our subcommittee about it, and I can recognise some of the comments that were made in the version that's come here today, so that's been really great to see. And we did touch on some of the points that have been raised already by colleagues. You know, that phrase, this is when the rubber hits the road, we're really going to get into some of the hard stuff now, aren't we? And actually some of the things that we talked about in place were, it's easy to write some of these down, but what happens when some of the principles collide? What happens when we can't deliver all of these things at once? And that's, I think, where the importance of trust and openness and, you know, transparency really, really comes through. And it's just struck me listening to some of the conversation already today how important this document is. I almost wanted to refer to the strategy document earlier in the agenda before we got to it. So the conversations we had about people at the centre of decision making, priorities such as being able to address inequalities and target resource to our most deprived communities, but also things like priority programmes such as discharge. You know, we need to find a way of making sure that our financial decision making matches our strategic aspiration, don't we? And I think that's why it was helpful, Jonathan, to hear you say at the start it's an enabler to the 5-year strategy. So I think it's a really good place to be stepping off from, and it does reflect, to me, a really good process operated across West Yorkshire and within places. So thank you for that.
Councillor Hinchcliffe and then Robin, and then Jane.
So I obviously welcome the strategy. It does make several times reference to the overall 5-year plan, which is good. But I just wonder if the objectives you've got in there perhaps need to replace them with the plan ones, just to really properly, you know, tie it into that strategy. And I understand everybody around this table gets the importance of local action and regional action. I know we all do, but NHS nationally have to understand that if they ask us for a 5-year plan, then surely we have to respect that 5-year plan and not jump to their plans, which obviously might not be what our plans are. So this is a tussle of devolution, isn't it? They're giving us an opportunity to develop our own plans, and then saying, that's very nice, but actually can you do these 6 things? But that doesn't actually work. They can't do that anymore. And we probably need to push back a bit on that, because otherwise there is no point in all the money and time that's spent on a regional plan if then they come up with objectives which override that plan. I probably speak what everybody else thinks, really, but just frustrating that always happens.
Thank you very much. Robin?
Yeah, just I wondered whether we might want to think about the investment in economic social impacts in the light of the next few days and what will emerge from the new government. And it's obviously something we don't know for certain, but I think reading the rooms would suggest that there will be a very direct link to investment and productivity and work, and a much more explicit focus on this, sort of building on what Tom said earlier. And I just think one of the very clear manifestations of that is that it's said that we've got very low unemployment. Well, actually, we've got low numbers of people claiming unemployment benefit. We actually have very high levels of people not working, and I think the evidence is around the last 18 months, around 500,000 people in their 50s and 60s have left the workforce, some by choice, many through long-term conditions and health issues. And I think, given what the previous job of the new Secretary of State for Health and Social Care was, which is DWP, she is making the link to ability to work, hospital backlogs, people with long-term conditions. And I think the thing that I think Rob said about that these are all related, these priorities, that NHS and the budget will be very focused on, if we're going to make this leap in terms of productivity and investment and growth, we need more people in the workplace. Because, you know, the other option is migration, and although actually net global migration has increased in the last 3 years, it's come from different parts of the world, not Europe. Actually, I don't think that's going to be necessarily where it's looked for, and it's going to be looked like getting people back into work, and health conditions is a major barrier. people's access to work. So I just think, well, we'll just refresh that and think about that in terms of our strategy in the next few days.
Okay, thank you very much. That connection between health and wealth. Okay, so we've got 2 points there: our relationship with NHS England and requirements, and our relationship with government's expectations and requirements. So, Jonathan, Rob, do you want to?
Okay, if we just come back on Robin's point, if that's okay.
Yeah.
So I think, what is helpful already is that, and there are 30 odd objectives in the finance strategy, so there are quite a significant number. But they are starting to prompt the sort of conversations that we need to have really about how ambitious we want to be. So, for instance, I know this isn't quite the question that you're asking, or quite the point you were making of him, but just in terms of how the NHS addresses social value in procurement, for instance. So we all put in the minimum 10%, but what 10% of how are we describing that? What are we really driving? What are we driving through our suppliers, through our sort of market engagement, etc. So I think there are some quite tangible things that we can start to pick up on and work together on if we so choose to.
Right. Rob?
So to Councillor Hinchcliffe's point, there'll always be a bit of tension between the national and the local. And I think we've been pretty good at staying on the tightrope. And I do think if we come back to the 6 things in the winter priorities going to achieve what we want on things like ambulance surrounds, probably it's the kind of stuff that we want to focus on. Do we do that at the exclusion of everything else? Definitely not. So part of this is making sure that the voltage that we feel from the centre doesn't overpower the voltage that we feel from the citizen and from people like yourselves, the representatives of the citizen, because that should be as strong, if not stronger, in what we do. And then to Robin's point, I think it really, really well made. And there's probably an action for us to think about as the combined authority and the mayor are doing their revised industrial strategy. As we did previously, we're redoing our strategy with the stuff about the economy, making sure that we keep reinforcing that a healthy population is a healthy workforce, is a productive workforce. And we already know from our own staff that we've got about a 1 percentage points difference in our sickness absence than NHS staff in the south. So we're already less productive because we have people more absent all the time because they're sicker, and that's played out across the population. So I think the action there might be to tie that in much more explicitly, and as Robin said, reading the rooms, that might be a really positive thing.
Karen?
Thank you. I think this is very that's the main character. I think one of the things that's really important is the way that we're it needs to be inclusive of everybody who's from the group.
Okay, thank you. Kim?
Pick up on some of what there's some great points in there in terms of the remit. I suppose, I guess the proof will be in our role as an ICB in terms of how brave we are in terms of setting what that looks like in terms of shift in proportions. And I obviously, as the VCS person, really welcome seeing the shift into the voluntary communities and enterprise sector, but I wonder whether we would take that one step forward and look further rather and talk about the shift closer to resources closer to communities themselves. So sometimes people talking about sort of the left shift. So thinking about everybody thinks that they're left, and sometimes our sector themselves, are corporate of doing that. So thinking about what we've been talking about today in terms of citizens, locality-based working that Karen's talked about. Can we be really brave? Can we explore what that would look like in reality and how we hold ourselves to account for what that looks like? There's some really innovative models around that. People who've tried out things like participatory budgeting. Are we brave enough to do something like that?
Thank you very much, that'd be helpful. And I think that I'd really welcome seeing some examples of where it works well, participatory budgeting, when we've used Section 75 to pool resources between the NHS and the local authority. I think these examples will then help us, give us confidence in being more bold. We talked about being bold earlier, to build on that. I'm really interested in our role as anchor organisations. I support your point, Robin, as well. What do we do around spending our money locally that helps our local economy, and then looking at employment and skills as well. We have got a joint public health role between the combined authority and ourselves. that work's concluding, so we'll need to wait to see the results of that. That can link with the revision of the local industrial strategy. And it feels, again, there's like, what do we do now, and then what do we do now to then plan for the next 2 years or so. Rob, are there any other final comments? I'm just trying to check around the room. Jane, and then we'll take a break. Rob.
Thanks. So two questions from me. So I really welcome the strategy. I think there's lots of thought and really collaborative work has gone into it, which is great. I guess my questions will be about thinking about our strategy and the areas where we do need to move forward, but recognising that we want to put as much funding as possible to places for them to then allocate. Where does the discussion, or where will the discussion take place around what are the other sources of income funding that can be utilised to pump prime some of our strategic thinking across the places and at the ICB level, and how do we get confident that we have enough there to support the long-term strategies that may need to be approached in that way rather than initially at a place level. And then more sort of from a process perspective, I'm assuming that the different clauses, I was looking particularly at something like using our collective resources wisely under 7.3, that each of the principals there, the finance community, are sort of buying into that's how they will apply it at their place with the resources that have been allocated to them. But I think my main question is how do we make sure we've got that right balance of sufficient funding to do stuff across the ICB, not purely in place.
Jonathan, yeah.
So thanks, Shane. Both really helpful questions. So our baseline allocation is all played out to places as at now, and we will, I think, start to consider through the 5 places whether there's an appetite from places to reallocate resources at a West Yorkshire level on a sort of case-by-case basis using some sort of principles. The resource that we get as an ICB or an ICS that we've got for a number of years now to do some of that strategic development, some of that transformation work, some of that primary work has been through what's called service development funding. And we know we've got service development funding this year. Again, all linked to national priorities, so very little discretion in terms of which programme we can deploy that money on, although some. We're not sure about what the outlook is for future years, so that money is non-recurrent, but we get it every year. So we're not sure about where that'll go in the future. I think as we start to understand more from what happens this week and start to get into potentially a funding settlement for the next 2 or 3 years for the NHS towards the end of the year, I think we'll have more clarity about what we do on that. The principle that sits behind the deployment of all of that resource, though, is through the programme boards that we have, which are made up of places. So places act in concert to support West Yorkshire in issues and initiatives. What was the second question, sorry, Jane?
I think you noted in confirmation that the principles below each of these paragraphs will be deployed there. The 30-odd strategic objectives in the strategy come from a piece of work that was done through the Finance Forum, which is the place Directors of Finance and Chief Finance Officers, and more recently the document's been tested out in August with all of the 5 places. So they're committing to apply them?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Rob, sorry, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, so just I think Jane's question posits, I think that we've got some strategic choices to make, and there probably is something about, as you put the strategy into practice, let's think of 3 of them that we might want to have a chat about, and we might want people to go away and do some work on. So the first is, what do you have a ring fence on what? So we've got the mental health investment standard is a ring fence, isn't it? It says you will grow by, your mental health budget will grow by at least the amount of growth that you get overall, because they've been underinvested in for too many years and the demand's huge, is the national policy. Are there other areas where we want to ring fence? Do we think it works? So I'm not saying we answer that question now, but that's a strategic choice. The next one might be, do we ask places to ask for how much money we should give them, or do we give it to them and then ask for some back? And I think we've gone for the let's give it to them and ask for some back. Let's not do all this we've got senior people in places doing really good work. Why would we ask them to prove that they can do the work? But what we need to do is to have sufficient in West Yorkshire to do the West Yorkshire work. So do we think that works or not is a good strategic choice, or do we top slice some and keep some back? So somebody needs to think about that. And then the third one we talked about, which is the distance from target. How bold do we want to be about how much we move towards what people should get rather than what they have been getting? So I don't know, Jonathan, if that's something that you might want to pick up as a direct consequence of the conversation today.
Okay.
I think the observation I would have finally would be that in all my experience, money is a servant of quality. And if we make quality a servant of money, we're lost. And this is really critical to this strategy. And then the money gets spent on people mostly. So this is really about investment in people. So when people talk about, we should be supporting the third sector, I'm saying, yeah, because that's capacity, that's people, that's a lot of people we can't afford to lose in the system. So the more that we can think about quality and people whenever we're talking about money, the better.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that discussion. So I'd really welcome some case studies maybe that could come along to demonstrate each principle. It could come to the Finance Committee for some oversight and support and critical friendship. I think there's something, a principle here if we're about working on seamless access to care and integration. We want to try and remove any issues around competition. We do hear the odd situation sometimes where commissioning or contracting hasn't quite worked in line with our values and behaviours, so how can we encourage others to, in our system and partnership, to make sure that they're aligned? So that was something I'd be interested in, and how we use social value as effectively as possible. Okay, thank you for that discussion. I'm really pleased that you all have an interest in this and taking this forward. Okay, we're going to take a break now. We've been sat here for a while. We'll take a 10-minute break. So I invite you to come back at 2:43. There's tea and coffee, and I appreciate some people may need to get going. Thank you. Okay, welcome back to our West Yorkshire meeting of our Integrated Care Board today. With the agenda slightly now, we're going to look at item 11, our corporate risk register, particularly so we can hear from colleagues, including our audit chair, Jane Mabey. So, Laura, do you want to just give us some highlights to Jane?
Thank you very much. Yes, I'll just give a brief introduction again to the paper. So just to advise colleagues that the ICB commenced its first risk cycle on the 1st of July as we were established. We are now drawing to the close of that first risk cycle today. The intention as we move forward is that the board will have sight of both corporate and place level risks. So you will see corporate risks, those are ones that are being managed centrally, that are scoring 15 plus. Those are deemed to be high-level risks if they're scoring more than 15. And you would also be cited on place risks that have a score of, again, more than 15, that have been identified as being common to more than one place. That would be 2 or more places identifying those risks. We have been discussing as part of the learning from this first risk cycle around those risks that are 15 plus, that are only in one place. As at the moment there is no direct mechanism to make the board aware of those, and we feel that that is a really key learning point from this first risk cycle. It's really important that you are cited on those potentially critical risks that are just in one place. So what you've got within the report is a summary of the corporate risks that have been identified during this first risk cycle. We wanted to give you early sight really of the nature of those high level risks. There is a lot of work behind them, and there is still some work to be done in terms of quality checking, including checking scoring, and fine-tuning those risks really, but it is giving you early sight as we come through this first risk cycle. The other bit that I really wanted to pick up was in terms of the place risks. So those are risks that have been identified in one of our 5 places. They have also worked through risk cycle starting in early July, and they had picked up, for example, risks that came from the predecessor CCGs during the transition period, and each place has broadly been able to follow the process that we expected during this first risk cycle, but very much taking the opportunity to learn and to consider how we evolve the approach as we move forward. I've given you an overview within the paper of those common risks that are starting to emerge. The common risks, just as a reminder, are those that are in 2 or more places, and you've got a summary of each of those within the paper just to give you an idea of the sorts of things that are emerging theme-wise. I've talked a couple of times about the emerging learning. We expected this first risk cycle to be very much an opportunity for significant learning. It is fundamentally different from what we've been used to doing within CCGs. It is a much bigger organisation and it is complex. And it has certainly been a learning experience over the last few weeks in terms of the development of the risk register. So we have been capturing that learning, thinking about how we evolve our approach as we go into the second risk cycle, which will start in the next few days. And we spent some time sharing that detail with the Audit Committee last week in more detail really around the emerging learning. I think the bits that I just wanted to finally say, just kind of next steps really, is I won't cover what the Audit Committee said. I'll let Jane do that as our Audit Committee Chair, and just making you aware really that this is an iterative process. I think we've done a huge amount of work during these first few weeks, but there is a lot more to do, and I would expect you to see a more detailed risk register as we come to the November board when we get to the end of our second cycle.
Okay, thank you very much. Jane, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Tabby, thanks, Laura. I guess just
Jane, would you just pull the microphone closer? Brilliant. See how it goes. Thanks.
Okay. So yeah, a few comments from the Audit Committee review, and definitely very supportive and thankful to Laura and the risk champions and the network that she's been working with, because they certainly have pulled an enormous amount of information together, and it's coming together well. I think we were very conscious at Audit Committee that the Audit Committee remit, different from the board, is actually very much about the risk management processes that is working through the whole of the West Yorkshire system, and so our focus is there, but hoping that through sort of our guidance and steer, that then the reporting that will come to board in the future will be much more about so what does it mean? What are the key risks that we should be focusing on here? I think we're still obviously developing that process, and we were talking about sort of reporting going forward once we've got the full picture brought together. So I think it's moving in the right direction. I think there's lots of work, as Laura mentioned, around calibration and how we ensure that those
risk registers at place are being calibrated in a way that then reflects into the board risk register, and I think there's more work to do there to ensure that people are consistent in how they're doing that, so that we don't get overreactive to some things, but that we have got appropriate sight of risks that we can do things at a board level to help manage. So I think that will sort of refine and finesse things going forward. I think the point that Laura mentioned in terms of at the moment, the way it's been structured would suggest that an individual risk from a place risk register wouldn't necessarily have a route to coming onto the board risk register reporting. We were concerned by that, and I think we feel that there may be occasions where there is a risk that is significant enough within one place, a single place, because of how that contributes into the system and may require resolution in terms of the system approach, that we should open it up so that there will be occasions where a high enough scored risk at a place on its own could then feature. And I guess the Airedale RAC, as we referred to earlier, had been brought forward because I think that was spotted. So I think we'd like to look at that in terms of the process going forward. And I think that's, at this stage we didn't get into doing the deep dive on the specific risks. I think we were assured of how it was coming together and how people were addressing it. Definitely, as I said, the calibration piece I think needs to be done, and then very much focusing on trying to help think about the reporting to ensure that we have a discussion at board in the future that isn't about the process and is it complete and we've got the right ones, but actually what are the thematic risks that we then need to have a discussion about and how get assurance about how those are being managed. Right, pause there.
Thank you very much to you both and everyone who joined the Audit Committee last week. So I know it was a robust discussion that you had, which is really welcomed. Again, this is another example of our work in progress as a brand new board and a new statutory organisation, but building on the legacy of our partnership of many years and the work of clinical commissioning groups as well. So we're asking to note this work in progress and be assured of the work in practice. Councillor Hinchcliffe.
Yeah, obviously welcome the work, but just quite understand why social care and local authorities aren't mentioned as part of the list. Where is that risk? That's a massive, if that's not doesn't get any money this week, that's a massive impact on the NHS's ability to do any needs with it.
Exactly, thank you. And going back to our discussion about flow, Bev, do you want to respond?
So again, and I think it's reflected on the comment about work in progress. So the escalation at regional level that I alluded to earlier in the conversation, that absolutely sits on that escalation of risk. So I think that there's a number of things I think that we need to refine on this. As Laura said, it's work in progress. So I think that that's kind of a live reporting of risk, if that makes sense, up to regions. We talk about risk, I think, probably on a daily basis as a board. So the one that you've just conference with is absolutely being discussed. Mitigations as well, we're discussing that, and it's on the escalation report last week to region.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it will be, as I've said, when Laura said that this is work in progress, I think we'll see more things added to this risk register going forward.
Okay, and thank you. Thinking about the whole system, including social care. Rob, do you want to respond?
So the question I have is a follow-up to Councillor Hinchcliffe's is, does that mean that places believe that it's being managed at an appropriate level there, but I think the estimate it's been identified in the place, but does it score 15?
To the extent this is within our control and the extent to which there are risks that aren't, I think in the context of both investment, workforce, I think there's a level of this that isn't purely in our control that leading to significant risk.
Okay.
I would think it should be, so I think that's a mitigating action to manage the level of risk. I think there is, I don't know, Karen may not know on this. But the discharge programme responding to this as a mitigating action, but I think there's a level of core risk that has Chris raising that I agree with.
So I think the strategic risk is reflected in the back, which is right. It's whether people believe that their social care services are at such a point at this juncture that it needs to be escalated to the board for action. And I guess we're hearing that it isn't.
Yeah, sorry, come back
to your point, Robin. Yeah, so we expect to take some action that's within our control.
This social care as a distinct issue, because that is, we talk about winter, but that's the context of social care charging reform, which is one of the most major changes in social care for years, and the massive risks around being able to deliver that to the current timescales. CQC inspection framework coming from April currently. So there's probably a discussion to be had about strategic risk of social care in its entirety to the health and care system in West Yorkshire. Some of which isn't obviously unique to us, but it's very, the consequences are specific to us.
Okay. Sorry, Tom.
Thanks. I think I was going to make a point before about the financial position of councils and the severity of that in year as well as for next year, and that is directly linked to the point Councillor just made. So I think trying to work through Rob's point, for me the action for this board and at this level would be around making the case to the centre about how critical that position is for the whole system, rather than having to, I don't think any of us are at the point where unless people would say where we want the board to intervene in our specific place, but we certainly are in a position where we're really worried about the fragility of the system as a whole, fragility of the market. There's a cost of care exercise that has just been done that I understand will come out with a very significant difference between what's provided now and what's needed, for example. And so I think they're the things that where this board could be advocating for us. That would be action.
Thank you. Mel, I know you're waiting, but I know Jane needs to leave. So Jane, do you respond and then we'll come to you?
Yeah, it's just a thought, because we looked at the Audit Committee in terms of the detail behind this. We had provider partnerships, also just wondering whether the social care would get in the same place, and we need to have the social element of the core district as well
Yeah, thank you. And we do have an emerging community services provider collaborative, which Karen from the Carla is involved in, so we can explore that. But thank you. Mel.
Thank you. This is probably a timing issue as much as anything, because I think perhaps when some of these papers were written, the quantification of the challenges financially, when I speak about Bradford District and Favour, weren't necessarily known and understood. When we get onto the integrated performance report, you'll see reference in there on discharge and flow that says we're really concerned about the services provided by the local authority, the best services discharge, because it will impact on patient flow. So I think in the next iteration you might usefully sort of see this iterated in a bit more comprehensively, because we've not yet had the discussion about actually quantifying the impacts of financial challenges.
Okay. Thank you. Mel. Other Mel.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if my microphone's working.
Just pull it a bit further forward to you.
Better. Thank you. Yes, certainly, in every place we've had discussions about the impact of social care reforms, and we've done that in Wakefield too. I think we need to see the outcome of this week before we understand what that impact could have. But I think everyone around this table understands that. We're going to get a lot less resources. It could impact on longer assessment rates for our patients, potentially who are in hospital. So it's absolutely an absolute health and care situation that we need to resolve together. And one of the things that we've been doing in Wakefield is having joint finance conversations between the local authority, obviously, and the NHS, but that'll be happening in every place. But at least then we can respond to that care fund asks, as well as, those are things that need to be in for next week anyhow in terms of our submissions. But some of the challenges are going to be really very real this winter in terms of the impact on the NHS if we don't get the good news everyone's talking about this week.
Okay. Thank you. I'm wondering if we are proposing a focus on topic for our November and January meeting, and I wonder if social care might be a topic for one of those meetings for us to look at together. I can see nods around the table, and as we look at these focus on sessions, we've got a number of principles. One is about embedding people's voices in there. We also need to make sure it references our strategy, we need to reference our risk registers as well, but it feels like that might be one of our topics. Kate, then Rob.
Just a quick one. Sorry, I'm Kate Sims, I'm the Director of People. Laura, I know you said this is work in progress. I'd really welcome to see some of the detail behind it. There's a collective reference to workforce, which says ICB workforce. I think we need to be clear we mean ICB, but we mean, the system, and it just links back to the enabling strategies for me. I think to know what the corporate identified people risks are, we can start to really prioritise some of the priorities of the people plans, just linking those two things, please. Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, I think this is exactly the kind of conversation we're having as we need this emerging risk, the pressures on council budgets, which are real, might mean that the capacity that we have to deal with the winter is curtailed. So we'd have to take action. And more about action is not about the processes of considering this, it's about action to address this. So I think one of the things we should take away from this conversation is that the Yorkshire Insurance Group and the group and the team looking at the winter planning need to look at whether there will be some choices that we're going to have to make on these winter. Similar to the choices we made last winter, where we reached. So it seems to me that would be a reasonable board to ask the executive to take away and for us to address that through the Yorkshire Group, the finance team,
Great. And weaving in public response place, but I know that what I love about you as a group is we're restless for improvement, so this is going to be keep working on this. Okay. Thank you very much. Okay, and thanks to Jane, I appreciate you need to go. So we're now going to jump back to item 10, which is our integrated performance dashboard. Our colleague Anthony Keeley is not here today, so Lou, you're representing. I'm presenting. Do you want to introduce yourself and explain your role?
So, hello, I'm Lou Walker, and I'm the Deputy Locality Director of West Yorkshire. Can you hear me? Yes. I don't know how close to get. So, the paper provides an update on a number of key performance metrics, but I think, just as Becky said, is really important. And having a lived experience alongside the performance report is what we'll need to move to. And I know that Hannah and I have got an agreement to get together to make that happen. But I would also like to assure people that in all the work that the programmes are doing, that people are up front and centre. And I was at the Council Alliance Board last week, where we had a very compelling story from a patient that helped us with the business of the Council Alliance Board. So I just wanted to chip that in to before starting out on what is quite a narrative and number-driven report, but does give us the flavour really of how we're working. So the payment, as always, to get it to a point that's useful for this forum, and also we've got a number of other reports going to other forums to help us run the business. The metrics that are in the slide deck are published data, and that means it's all going to be in arrears, those published metrics, by about 8 weeks. But what it does give us is a mixture, therefore, of pattern. What are the patterns that we're seeing across these metrics and our places? So they're important for that reason. To supplement that, we've also got what I think is a really interesting piece, which is the narrative, and that overview helps to draw out some of the risks. And we asked our place-based leads to contribute to that narrative so that we could get it more detailed and also to bring out more recent risks. And I think Mel's just illustrated by referring to the paper, that's where she's put reference to her concerns around the delivery around social care. So using the combination, and also each of the programmes has been asked to provide an update. This is where we get the exceptions, and I think we probably can refine it a bit better, but I think it gives us a good overview of a set of metrics. These metrics are really limited in that they don't reflect the work of partnership at the moment, because they are very health service focused, and I think that we will build on that together. I think I could take you through certain metrics and pick them out, but I think it would be really difficult to pick one over another. So I'll probably open it up to questions, because that might be where we pull out the items that we're really interested in. Though I know that we've already covered a number of topics that we're worried about, and I think that's probably helped us through the paper. So if I just say that if you can note the report as the current position on these metrics, and the report obviously will be enhanced and updated with all of your help. And then if we could discuss the current position and seek assurance that appropriate action has been taken to address areas and risks of concern. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as you say, we've had quite a discussion already today on flow, and we know your wish to develop the data and the intelligence that we want to use to demonstrate a system. Well,
so Lou rightly said it would be difficult to choose one metric over another. I just wanted to draw the board's attention to the fact that there will be additional scrutiny from the regulators around some of the indicators, particularly around ambulance response times, elective waiting lists and backlog, particularly for people waiting 104 weeks or more, where the expectation is that should be done by the September, and for people waiting 78 weeks or more, as well as some of the urgent emergency care indicators around 12-hour waiting and so on. So we know that we've got that audience, but we're interested in what actions we're taking in that space, and we'll pay more or less attention to us depending on how we're doing audience. So we must take a conversation like this.
thank you. AC, I know you wanted to talk about primary care. Is that something you want to come back to now from an earlier agenda item?
That is linked to this.
Oh, if you could pull the microphone. And others, please let me know if you've got comments on this report.
I think I was trying to pick out on the satisfaction access to primary care and what is being done in response to that. So I'd like to go back and figure out sort of what we are doing in the system like, because thinking about the holistic conversation that we are having both across social care, I think, and going back to that North Star, what we want to achieve, or it seems to be system flow and access to primary care, and by system flow meaning access to social care and how to improve that are the two key things we should start having across any conversation we have. So going back to primary care performance and specifically access to primary care, that might be that discussion full of what we are doing in order to improve the step, specifically for the more school.
Okay, thank you. So, James, would you respond on that? And then Hannah, I can see you've got your hand up, and then Becky.
Yeah, thanks, AC. So I suppose we know, as we've had a discussion already today, from some of the published work from Health Watch, that primary care access is a significant issue for people who know it's going to be in part of their ABCD. That's already been announced there. I think there's an awful lot of work that has been going into primary care before COVID in terms of developing primary care networks and how they link with their communities. We've also seen throughout COVID, especially specifically with the vaccination work, in terms of working better in our communities to improve access. This particularly for the vaccine during that, in terms of enabling access of our services in general practice to be better for vaccine. And we're already seeing how practices are building on that, primary care networks are building on that, those experiences of improving their access, improving the access of their services, so that it's not the people that are hard to reach, it's the access, it's the services that are hard to reach. So I think there's learning from that. I think there's a workforce, as we talked about the workforce across all our issue. But actually in primary care prior to COVID and throughout COVID, how do we work better with other elements of both health and care system in terms of workforce to bring in our workforce, and actually when you want to have access to a GP, it's not the GP perhaps you want to have access to, it's the services within general practice and within the wider primary care. So you access to paramedics, access to physiotherapists, pharmacists, actually probably the better points of what you might want to, how you might want to deal with some of the questions that the public from the traditional GP actually is better that place for the pharmacist and medication boosting. And that's what we've heard from Health Watch.
Stock take